This is the Chassidic Story Project with Barak Hullman, podcasting from Jerusalem, Israel. This podcast is sponsored by listeners just like you. To become a supporter of this podcast, please go to HasidicStory.com, HASIDIC story.com. You'll never know, you'll never know, you'll never know, you'll never know.
The Heiliger Sansa Rebbe, Rabbi Chaim Halbersam of Sans, was one of the big Rebbes, and even though he was so busy all the time, and people were coming to him all the time for help, he always set aside time to collect tzedakah for Jews that he knew needed help. And there's a halacha that when people collect charity, they should travel in pairs. Could be for safety, it could be for trust. And so the Sansa Rebbe, whenever he went around to collect tzedakah, he always brought along with him a gabbai, or one of his chassidim. One time, the Sansa Rebbe went out to collect a large amount of tzedakah for a wealthy Jew who had lost everything. And if you don't know, the way it worked in the old days is when somebody would lose a lot of money, and they had previously been wealthy, the Jewish community would get together and try to raise enough funds to get that person back into business. They did it in part because a person who's very wealthy, it's very hard for them to be poor. It's also, of course, hard for a poor person to be poor, but even harder for a wealthy person to go from wealth to suddenly be poor. And they also hoped that by getting this person back on their feet, the person would be able to repay the favor and give tzedakah to the Jewish community. So the Sansa Rebbe was walking around collecting money for this wealthy Jew, and at some point he ended up at one of the wealthiest Jews in Sans, a Jew who lived in a huge mansion. And when they arrived, they were brought into a special room just for guests that had a velvet sofa, and they were served tea and cookies with silver cups and plates. And after a few minutes, the master of the house entered the room and warmly greeted the Sansa Rebbe. Shalom Aleichem, Rebbe. What an honor to have you in my humble home. What can I do for you? What are you here for, Rebbe? The Rebbe said that he and the gabbai that's with him are here to collect a large sum of money to help out a wealthy Jew who had lost everything. And they were asking for 500 rubles, which was a huge amount of money at the time. So the wealthy Jew, the Baal Habayit, he says to the Rebbe, "Tell me, Rebbe, are you collecting this for a private person or for an institution or an organization?" So their Sansa Rebbe said, "I'm really sorry, but I can't tell you the man's name because it might cause him to be embarrassed. You'll just have to trust me that this is somebody who's really deserving. And if you're going to give me tzedakah, you know that it will go to a good place." But the wealthy man was very curious. He really wanted to know. You know, he knew all the wealthy people all around for many miles. He wondered which of his friends lost everything. Who is the Sansa Rebbe collecting money for? So the wealthy Jew said, "Rebbe, of course, I trust you, and I would even be willing to give you thousands of rubles. But first, I'd like to know, who am I giving the money to?" And the gabbai who was escorting the Rebbe, he said, "Rebbe, come here, let me whisper something in your ear." The Rebbe leans over on his chair. And the gabbai says to the Rebbe, "Rebbe, you know, thousands of rubles, that's a lot of money. We could stop collecting money for this wealthy Jew if he gave us thousands of rubles. We might even have something left over to help somebody else. Maybe, Rebbe, you know, he's a wealthy Jew. He can be trusted. We could just share a little bit of the details and maybe the person's first name." The Sansa Rebbe finished listening. He didn't say a word. He just turned back to the wealthy Jew. And the Sansa Rebbe said, "The only thing I can tell you is that once he used to be the pillar of his community, and he gave thousands of rubles before he went bankrupt and his business collapsed. And that's all I can tell you. I can't tell you any more details or the person's name." The wealthy Jew, he was even more curious than before. And so he said to the Rebbe, "Rebbe, if you tell me the name of the person that I'm giving the tzedakah to, I'll give you half of what you need, or maybe even the entire sum, if I can afford it." The Rebbe simply said, "My sweetest friend, you have to understand that even though the amount of money that you're offering us is very generous, much more than we expected, the honor of this Jew who lost everything is more valuable to me than any amount of money. Even if you were to give me the entire sum of everything we needed to help this Jew, and even more, I still would not share the identity of this Jew because it might cause him embarrassment, and I'm only here to help. I'm not here to harm. So the wealthy Jew, he had this look on his face, and he said to the Rebbe, Rebbe, can you please come to my private room and we can have a one-on-one conversation? So the Rebbe gets up and the two of them walk into the room. They close the door and lock it. And the wealthy Jew just stares at the Rebbe. And the Rebbe is staring straight into his eyes. And the wealthy Jew starts to cry. Rebbe, I have lost everything as well. I don't know who this Jew is that you're collecting money for, but I'm so embarrassed to say this to anyone. But when I saw how you were guiding this other person's privacy, no matter how many times I pushed you, I knew I could trust you as well, Rebbe. Please forgive me for being so obnoxious. I didn't mean to embarrass you, but I just had to know if I could trust you. I made some very bad decisions in business, Rebbe, and I've lost everything. I need help. I'm in so much debt that I don't know how I could ever repay it. And we might get kicked out of our house soon, and I'll have to go door to door, begging for money. The Sansa Rebbe and the wealthy Jew walked back out of the room where the Gabbai was waiting, and the Rebbe said, our work here is done for now. The Gabbai got up, and the Sansa Rebbe and the Gabbai left the house. A week later, the Rebbe returned to the wealthy Jew's home with a large sum of money. Not only had he been able to raise the money to save the original Jew who had lost everything, he was able to save this Jew as well and get him back on his feet, pay off all of his debts, and get him back in business. And for the rest of his life, this wealthy Jew supported the Sansa Rebbe in all of his tzedakah projects. And nobody knew anything about this conversation or what the Sansa Rebbe had done until the funeral of the Sansa Rebbe many decades later, where the wealthy Jew stood there and told everyone this amazing story of how the Sansa Rebbe had helped him get back on his feet and never shared a word to a single soul about their conversation. I feel like we need one more short story, so here's a quick one. One day, there was a Chassid that came to Rabbi Zusha, and he said he had a strange dream. His father, who had recently passed away, appeared to him, begging him to be baptized, to become a Christian. Chas v'shalom, God forbid. The first time he had this dream, he just ignored it. The second time, the father kept demanding again and again. He said, don't ignore my dream. And the third time, his father was threatening him. So he came to Rabbi Zusha and he said, Rabbi Zusha, what am I supposed to do? I mean, my father was a religious man. He never had any tendencies to convert to Christianity. I don't understand where this is coming from. Please tell me, what do I do? So Rabbi Zusha said, you need to ask the Chever Kadisha, the burial society, to open up your father's grave and look inside. Somehow, a cross or a crucifix or something similar must have fallen into your father's grave. And so when the Chever Kadisha reopened the grave, sure enough, they saw that a coin that had a cross on it had fallen into the kever. They removed the coin, and the chassid didn't have those dreams about his father anymore. Somehow the story got to Rabbi Eliyahu, the Vilna Gaon, who was the great arch-antagonist of the Chassidim. And when the Vilna Gaon heard that Rabbi Zusha had said that there must have been a crucifix in the kever, the Vilna Gaon was very surprised, because he said, this appears actually in the Talmud Yerushalmi. And the Vilna Gaon was shocked that a Chassidic Rebbe would know the Talmud Yerushalmi so well that he would know to quote its source. And eventually, the story that the Vilna Gaon had heard about what Rabbi Zusha said came back to Rabbi Zusha. When Rabbi Zusha heard this, Rabbi Zusha said, it's true. Rabbi Zusha did not know that it's in the Talmud Yerushalmi. But what Rabbi Zusha does know is the same source that the Talmud Yerushalmi saw, Rabbi Zusha also saw. ma 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 ma, la la la, oh 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 oh, mama 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 mama, la 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 la, oh la 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 la.